Hello, this is Pick, and welcome back to my guide for FTB Sky's Expert Mode. Today is going to be very big on automation, so without further ado, I'm going to do something with the slime event that just happened. The tiniest slimes can be put into a bucket, and if you walk around with that bucket in your inventory, at least on your hotbar, the slime will start to jump if you enter a slime chunk. Remember that you can press F9 to view the chunk boundaries. I'll walk around all the space I currently have in my base and see which slime chunks exist. It turned out that the only slime chunks were by the house you start in, so if I want to make a slime farm, I'm gonna have to do it lower down or in a different chunk. I'll at least keep it in mind for later though. Last episode I got started with the Pedestals mod, but today we're going to go much more in depth on what you can do with it. There's a lot of things that open up now, especially because most pedestals don't use redstone flux or forge energy for power. The first thing I'm going to want is an upgrade tool. This is made by putting a bookshelf on the ground, then getting a stick and a gold ingot and putting one of them in your offhand and clicking on the bookshelf, and that'll make an upgrade tool. So, what kinds of pedestal upgrades are there? Well, there are a few of note that I'll be going over today, but the first one's going to be the attacker upgrade. This is a particularly useful one as it attacks mobs in a set area. What the upgrade tool does is it lets you take upgrades off of pedestals that are on them. So, by putting it in your offhand and left-clicking on the pedestal that has an upgrade on it, it'll take the upgrade off and put it back in your inventory. There are two different slot types for pedestals. The first one is the generic one that has the item floating above the pedestal and rotating. This is when the pedestal is just storing the item. You'll see this when you move items around between pedestals and such, like how the material generator has the gravel and flint floating above it, if you recall from last time. The other way is to put an item on the pedestal for it to use. This is like having it in its hotbar and selected. When it's like this, the pedestal will attempt to use the tool that is being placed on it. Different upgrades accept different tools, of course. Whenever you want to place an item in a special slot, that goes for tools, work cards, and filters and such, you want to insert it in the offhand. Speaking of filters, all upgrades are crafted using its designated tool and just a bunch of sticks. To set a filter, you're going to need to shift right click on an inventory that has the items in it that you want filtered. Usually this can just be a pedestal, but it works on anything, chests, drawers, etc. You can right click a filter in the air to change it from whitelist to blacklist, and shift right click it within your offhand to change whether it does items or fluids or whatever. To clear a filter, you just have to shift right click it in the air. This works for any type of card that has a shift right click to set the filter kind of deal. Work cards as well. Apologies if there's some desync between the stuff I say and what's being shown on screen. Hopefully it's close enough that it doesn't matter too much. That's what I get for editing in post, but this is the easiest way to do it. The next tool is the work tool. This one usually operates in an area, but can target specified blocks or, in some rare cases, pedestals themselves. To set the area for a work card, simply right-click with it on the first block that you want to include, and then right-click on the second block in the area you want to include. This is going to include things like walls, and that means that the block that you're clicking on is also in that area. The only other feature of note is the tag feature, but we don't really need that right now, so I'm not going to go over it. Remember that you can clear the work area card by clicking in the air, not pointing at a block. Also, one more reminder that you can left click with the tool in your offhand to remove that type of card from the pedestal. Like, you can remove the work area card if you're holding the work tool in your offhand. So now, once we put this in the mob farm, and a note is that pedestals can be disabled with redstone signals, so be careful. After you've defined your area, given a weapon to your pedestal, and put on the attacking upgrade, you can proceed to let the pedestal do all the attacking in the mob farm for you. This means off the rip we have automated mob drops and source, and experience, though we can't automatically retrieve that just yet. While we have several options for item collection at this stage, I think the easiest one is just to make an item collector. This is just going to use 4 obsidian and an ender pearl. If you need more obsidian, now you should have access to fire essence, as we're going to be automatically acquiring fire shards. 8 stone and 1 fire essence make 8 magma blocks, which can be cooled into obsidian. Eventually I will make a much better system to store items from mob farms, but this one is just for the baby mob farm anyway, and it's probably going to get taken down at some point or just permanently turned off. To get netherrack, you can put the material generator pedestal on a block of nether bricks, which is gotten from nether brick, which is gotten by putting bricks in the spirit fire. You might also want some different materials. I'll be going for clay and andesite right now, just some stuff that'll be useful to have at a later point. When working with material generators, you should store your blocks or items produced in an appropriate drawer. For clay, that would be a compacting drawer, as you can backcraft it into clay balls, and any item that can be crafted forward or backward between a item and block form can fit in the compacting drawer. Otherwise, a regular single slot drawer will do, unless it's something like gravel and flint where you produces 2 products. With netherrack acquired, I can make tools out of soul steel. Soul steel is a pretty good tool, has a decent mining speed, and hits for a good amount of damage with the sword. But most importantly of all, you can throw the soul steel tools into the soul fire, and it'll regain durability. It's like a slower mending in a way. Where these tools really shine, however, other than their fake mending, is that they can gain more souls per kill than regular tools. I saved the Soul Reaper book that we got earlier from a quest reward, and I'm using it on this soul steel sword, and now I can get 3 souls per kill instead of just 1. This means it's very quick to grind up a witch soul crystal, which I will be using later and grinding up over time, as well as chickens, of course. Since we're automating andesite and have access to zinc nuggets, I can make andesite alloy in the mechanical mixer, which means that I can make the water wheels last that much longer. Stay tuned though, because in this episode, we're going to be moving away from them by the end. This island is very nice and all, but there's a whole world out there of void and villages. By working towards a broom, I can fly out to those villages and get some pretty good loot. To make a broom, first grow a willow sapling. This comes from sifting leaves, or you could use one that you get as a quest reward. After that, use some bone meal on grass blocks that you've probably already made to get some tall grass, and shear it to get the grass item, which can be turned into redstone root and then turned into mandrake root. Now we're going to make the way of finding these villages, the Eye of Legend. By making an ender eye and surrounding it with otherworld ashes, that's gotten by putting otherworld wood in the spirit fire. You could have gotten that from a quest reward, but you could also make otherworld wood. We'll get to that later. Anyway, once you make that, that'll be like a reusable ender eye for finding these villages. So, once you have the broom, you can board it, and then you can go up and fly away on it. You can use this eye as many times as you want, and it has no durability or ammo count. Make sure that you have a good amount of durability on your broom before you ride it. If you run out, you're just gonna fall into the void, and that's no good, now is it? Anyway, once you reach a sky village, you'll notice that there's a lot of useful stuff. First and foremost, a lot of the ground is made of white rock, which is something we do need for further progression. However, I will be making some white rock legitimately before I go ahead and use this whole surplus I got from the village. The first thing to do is yoink some villagers. You're gonna want to hold on to a few of them, especially if you happen to find one with a decent trade, of course. Just shift right click and you'll pick it up. You'll find some good gear, and you'll also even find enchanting setups potentially. These will have a lot of amethyst, so if you don't want to go to the Nether for the Nether villages yet, you can potentially get some amethyst here. It's not a guarantee though. I will be flying to the Nether to go visit a Nether village to get quote-unquote legitimate amethyst later. I would recommend crafting a backpack beforehand though. I didn't, and I kinda ran out of room to bring stuff with me. Definitely get anything that you see as valuable and not easy to make though. I came out with a pretty good sword from the loot, and some chest plates and other little things. But most importantly, I got this enchanting table. This will mean I can, of course, enchant things. Might want some bookshelves though. Something neat is that question mark in the corner. It can show you what enchantments are available with the given bookshelf power you have around the enchanting table. At the lowest level, there's of course only so much you can get, but it's basically guaranteed soulbound if you really care for that. I'd recommend putting a few bookshelves around it if you have the enchanting table so that you can get unbreaking on your broom, because you can enchant the broom brush. Now I need some ersatz leather, which is just some industrial hemp surrounding a honeycomb. This will allow me to make a backpack, which is basically one full chest worth of items to hold on you. Definitely want more loot for that Nether village run. I would recommend covering as much of your Nether area in bottom slabs as possible. That way you don't have things like basals coming and killing you like you've probably seen from several streamers or whatever. Much like their overworld counterparts, Nether villages also have pretty good loot. However, their denizens are a bit more dangerous. You're going to want to make sure you're equipped with refined glowstone or gold armor to neutralize the piglins, as well as not look at any of the other mobs that might be troublesome. If you shift right click on a piglin, you pick it up, but that will aggro them. So all that effort I went through to make sure I was not going to aggro the piglins ended with me aggroing the piglins. So this was a waste of a trip, more or less. Well, I got a little bit of loot out of it in the end, so I guess it's something. Thankfully, we have no need to deal with the default bartering mechanics. Just make a bartering station and plop that piglin you abducted in there and you can trade with it automatically. The thing of interest from here is amethyst shards, but there's a bunch of other good things in their loot tables if you're willing to get some time invested and some gold. This is a bit sudden, but the wandering trader can carry nickel. You definitely want to pick some of this up, as early Invar will allow for a lot of good things to happen. Firstly, it'll allow you to trade with regular villagers when they're not having bugged emerald trades. Some of the emerald trades get through, but most of them require the various tiers of coins, so getting early Invar is very good for this. I wonder whose head this is. Anyone have any ideas? Oh, by the way, you might want some nickel for bees if you're interested in that. Librarians are typically a very good villager, and that's no different here. They always start with a looting 3 trade for an enchanted book. I would definitely pick a few of these up actually, for both personal use and automation. I'll definitely be swapping the sword out on the attacking pedestal for one with looting 3 on it, as that'll greatly increase the rate of mob drops as well as the rarities. How about we get started on the coke oven? So to make the coke oven, we're gonna need coke bricks, of course. Coke bricks are comprised of sandstone, clay, and ash bricks. I wonder if we automated one of those recently. In the meantime, I'll get a bunch of gravel hammering down, and also manually get started on ash bricks. To make ash bricks, we're going to need ash, and to get that, you blast smelt logs. Reminder that you will need the heated blaze burner for this. Also, I don't believe I mentioned this yet, but I had a slight error when I was discussing the mechanical press. While I was correct in saying that it uses an exorbitant amount of stress units, using the hand crank you can at least speed it up twice, so you're going 4 times faster. This is plenty fast for most purposes before we get automated stress units. Again, we'll get to automating stress units later in the video. I'm also going to start growing a little bit of kelp now. You know, so I have enough for mechanical belts later. I didn't mention it before, but I did make an alloy kiln to make that Invar. It just requires 8 kiln bricks and then assemble it with the engineer's hammer. Also, you're probably going to want to make some redstone glass, as we need 3 deployers which require electron tubes which require redstone glass. Now it's time to set up a type of crafting cycle. We're going to make a loop that transfers items around the circuit, and it's going to get processed by everything once on one pass. You're required to have at least one setup of belts, but the other one can actually be item trains. You see, item trains have this quirk, right? They'll just let an item roll along on it if it has nothing to drain from it. So this is like having a reverse without having another belt and some type of reversal to your kinetic energy, so to speak. To explain what's going on in simplest terms possible, I'm going to have one belt rotating in one direction. This means that the items are going to be processed along this line, starting at the front and ending at the back. I did make an error and put the items on the deployers backwards, but we'll get there when we get there and it's inconsequential. Just make sure you fix it if you do that mistake. Once the items hit the end of the belt, and you're going to want a solid block blocking the conveyor belt so they don't go flying, I have a funnel into a chest that takes the items in and pushes them out along the item drains. This is like a little conveyor belt that sends it to the other chest that sends the items around the loop once more. This is going to run the items until they are finished. Now, preferably I would have a longer set of belts where I have an output for whatever output item I'm looking for, but since we're only making one coke oven right now, I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'll just be taking the items off of the belts manually. You're also going to want to set up your 3 deployers on top of the conveyor belts, and you're going to want to connect them with a conveyor belt to make sure all of them are powered, as well as making sure that the whole thing is getting power from the bottom conveyor belt. I understand some people get a little confused with how Create works because it requires a little more thinking than just plonking down blocks and setting their inputs and outputs. Generally speaking, if I were to give some tips on how to use Create effectively, you're going to want to make sure you leave room for transmitting your kinetic energy and make sure that it's all rotating in the correct direction. Most of the time, there will be components that don't require direction, such as these deployers. They can move in either. But since we're moving items in one direction along the belt, the transfer belt does have to move in the correct direction or it will go backwards. The main ways of transferring kinetic energy are through shafts, belts, and cogwheels. Shafts are useful if you want to move laterally and keep your kinetic energy rotating in the same direction. Belts are the alternative to shafts that keep the same kinetic energy rotation direction, but also happen to move them in perpendicular directions to the shafts. So if we're rotating counterclockwise and our shafts are traveling north, south, our belts have to travel east and west. The other thing of use is cogwheels. Those allow you to change the direction of rotation, but it alternates so that every other one is going to move in the opposite direction. There are also things like gearboxes and gear shifts that change the rotational direction by a perpendicular amount, so you can make things going east-west go north-south along your shaft lines. Consequently, this would make belts go north-south, of course. Gearboxes can also be useful for changing the direction of a rotation along a shaft line. However, a cheaper alternative is the gear shift, but that requires a redstone signal to operate. I tend to just use gearboxes when I want to reverse the rotation direction. To use deployers, you simply have to make sure the item is placed into the hand of the deployer. Here's a demo of what things are supposed to look like when they're moving properly. You can clearly see that the unfinished coke bricks are going along the front line and the back line in opposite directions. This means that they're getting hit by each deployer in the right sequence. Because we need 20 coke bricks, we need 20 fire essence. If you are short on fire essence, you could just put 2 large, powerful fire shards into imbuement chambers and let that run while you're out building your coke oven stuff. I would definitely recommend having some stuff stocked up, though, ahead of time. Building the coke oven is also quite a simple task. Just make a 3x3 of coke bricks. You only have to make 20 because the quest gives you 7 more, so that completes the 3x3x3 for your first coke oven. Then just put some carbon in, like coal, and wait. Wood also works to make creosote, but we want the coal coke. Real quick, if you're hurting for storage space, you can make some repositories. They're quite cheap, as it's only 4 logs and 4 gold nuggets to make a full double chest size in one block. This allows you to store much more in a much compacted area. Who wants to see some jank? It's time to automate the squeezer. So, by putting a redstone clock underneath the squeezer and putting 2 armor stands on top of the squeezer, we can make a loop that pushes the armor stands up while also having them come down and re-squeeze the block. It's inefficient because you're still using the squeezer, but it's automatically running the thing, and with the other options for crushing right now, this is probably the fastest. If you didn't know, the squeezer outputs along those channel lines in it. If you look at the squeezer, like if you see those lines that come out towards the edge from the center square, that's where it outputs to. So put a hopper in on one side and a chest on the other. The reason I wanted to do this, that being setting up the coke oven and this automated squeezer, is so we can get coke dust. Coke dust doubles the output of biomass when we make things in the mixer, and I want to make sure to use the flour recipe to be getting as many biomass per coke as possible. Using coal coke in the supercooler nets us the max amount of peat bog we can get per craft. This is going to be important for crafting what is known as terra preta. For my next project, I'd like to make a wheat farm. This means I'm going to want to make it grow as fast as possible. Terra preta is a growth accelerator that goes underneath the farmland that gets planted on top of it. So you'd have the layer of terra preta, then a layer of farmland, and then your crops growing on the top. I want to make more than I need though. I will be making a 9x9 farm with just one hole in the center for water. That will be plenty to suit our needs. Any extra can be converted into Terra Glass, which is yet another growth accelerator. So this is to make a very fast wheat farm. So that way we're going to have enough vegetable oil to make biodiesel. Also, I apologize for just using cobblestone for everything. I promise I will stop doing that once I get a fair amount of automation going and I can comfortably build with other things. To do the farming itself, I'm going to use pedestals. I make a few mistakes along the way, but ultimately I will tell you what the working setup is like. So first of all, to set up the work area, you're going to want to put blocks where the crops are going to be, not where the farmland is. Place your area on one corner of the farmland and then on the other, and then you can simply have the farm get fully covered by the pedestal. Both pedestals have to be facing the bottom edge of a block, however, neither can be on the same plane as the crops they're trying to harvest. You'll see what it looks like in the end setup. Another thing to note is that you have to go into your team settings for your FTB team's chunk claiming and make sure that all fake players are allowed. Otherwise, the planting won't be able to happen and you won't be able to have the pedestals do anything at all. So now that the farm is working properly, what I did was I have the planter a block above where the crops are, and the harvester is underneath where they are. This means that the harvester and planter are both out of the way of the crops, and neither will get caught on their own harvest loop, so to speak. Now, there is an error with them right this moment, but in future versions this shouldn't be an issue where they might stop if they can't perform an action. You can also upgrade the harvester to do gentle harvest, meaning you don't need the planter, but I don't have a nether star yet, so I won't be doing that quite now. The regular item collector I used for the mob farm just won't cut it this time. I'll be using an item collector from Cyclic instead. This allows a configurable ranged area, and it picks up things very quickly. Then I can just empty them out with the chute into a drawer, but you'll see that in a moment. By filtering for seeds, I can extract from the item collector and send the seeds only back to the planting pedestal. Ultimately, I will be moving this to the drawer though. This is just a proof of concept. Since various types of dye are going to be useful in the near future, I'm going to make some floral fertilizer to get every type of Botania flower. If you have a flower pouch, which is obtained from a quest reward, you can have them all automatically get picked up into the flower pouch, and then take out the ones you need and use bone meal to farm more of them. In this case, since the Terra Glass requires lime stained glass, I just need lime dye, so of course I will be using a lime flower to produce that lime dye. Lime dye will be useful later for crafting something else, but we'll get there when we get there. Here's the full farm in action. You can see that I'm using a chute to transfer items from the item collector down to the drawer. That chute has a high transfer rate, so it makes it ideal for this. Also, the drawer has a copper storage upgrade and a void upgrade. Now I went ahead and grinded up those 512 witch souls that go into the soul cage. Obviously I used my special sword that gets extra souls, and I also got a fair amount of witch drops as a result, since I gave looting 3 to my soul steel sword. I know I skipped ahead quite a bit here, but I made a witch farm. Max tier soul cages have a range of 23 by 23 by 8, which means that you want to place it at least 4 blocks into the air and with a 23 by 23 space for the witches to go. A redstone link can be used to disable the soul cage from far away. Also do note that only max tier soul cages are responsive to redstone and other spawn related things. A pedestal is doing the killing, much like the other mob farm. Ethereal glass is just the non-tinted variant of the one you see in the other mob farm as well. And if you want to get a ton of vector plates easily, blackstone is farmed by using the material generator on a block of coal. You should have plenty of sugar from fighting tons of witches to grind that soul gem up. And slime balls can be made with lime dye and dough. That's why I said lime dye is useful. And since we have the wheat farm, you just have to mill up wheat and get dough after you wash it. I'm not going to use it right now, but I will make a Reaper generator for later. This is an RF producing generator, much like the peat generator. It's your other option if you don't want to automate peat. I'm going to be doing both anyway. Note that it requires a special structure in order to be made, and it consumes that structure, so be ready to make it. I went ahead and made an item distribution thing for the drops from the witch farm. I have an item collector as well as a brass funnel that exports stacks at a time, moving along a conveyor belt into a bunch of andesite funnels attached to drawers. Make sure all the funnels have arrows pointing in the proper directions. And you'll probably notice that I'm using a water wheel to power this. Now, remember that water wheels only take durability damage when doing work that requires stress units. Belts don't require stress units, so therefore using them is effectively free. So that way you can have a water wheel run a belt line that is just a belt line, nothing else forever. At the end, I'm trashing anything I don't want. I don't really need potions right now. Now to get onto ethanol production. Ethanol requires sugar, spider eyes, and water. Where have I heard those item drops before? It's almost like I made the witch farm mostly for that. Anyway, by putting a basin lid on a basin, it's capable of making that ethanol. I'm going to be using 4 basins, so I have enough production rate to keep up with the demand for biodiesel coming from several generators at once. Right now I'm doing a whole lot of messing around with pedestals. I end up ditching this in favor of mechanisms transporters, which I will get to crafting in just a moment. Pedestals are in fact powerful, but when I have this many inputs and outputs to keep track of, it's just not worth dealing with. Before I did that though, I went ahead and prepped some biodiesel for my first bucket. Vegetable oil comes from pressing seeds, which as you can see is just a one-step process. The ethanol is also being produced, and those both get routed into the center basin, which is mixing them together with ever-burning air. Ever-burning air comes from smelting air essence, which comes from air shards through the imbuement chamber. While I technically do have this automated at the mob farm, it's not too fast, but it also doesn't use them too fast, and I'm only going to automate it fully once I make a proper mob farm. You get 16 ever-burning air per air essence. Per craft, you get 200 biodiesel, which means that you're using 1 ever-burning air for 200 biodiesel. The consumption rate of biodiesel in a diesel generator is 2 millibuckets per second. We produce biodiesel at a rate of 200 biodiesel per ever-burning air. After doing the math, this tells us that we consume 1 air shard per 26 minutes of biodiesel for 1 diesel generator. So that would be like 13 minutes per 2 generators, etc. This is good enough of a return rate to where I'm not going to worry about automating ever-burning air right now. To get access to logistical transporters and mechanical pipes, I need steel. Steel is made in the blast furnace, which of course requires blast brick. Magma blocks are fairly straightforward to craft, so are nether bricks. Creosote came from the coke oven, and I can just use a mechanical pump to pump out of the tank and into the spout. The spout automatically deploys without kinetic energy. And then 1 press, and then that's 20 more blast bricks, and you know, same deal as the coke oven. Dump in some iron, dump in some coke, blah blah blah. It's worth noting that the blast furnace is much faster than it is by default. Now I can make treated wood by putting a bucket of creosote oil in the center and planks around it. This also works with the mechanism tank full of creosote oil. On the current version there's a bug, it'll be fixed next version so that I will be able to do that. Now we can get started on occultism. On the right in the book there's a button that allows you to mark all of the available things as red, so you can just mash click that until absolutely everything is unlocked. By sifting crushed netherrack, you can get otherworld saplings, grow those into an otherworld tree. Normally, you need to eat demon's dream fruit to see the otherworld wood, but that's been changed in this pack, so you no longer need to. Throw the logs in the spirit fire to get otherworld ash, and smelt otherstone to get burnt otherstone. When looking at a circles diagram in a book, you can press the eyeball to lay that on the ground in the world so you know how to build the structure. After you make a chalk, you can fill in all the empty spots, and remember all that tallow we got? Well, that can be used to make candles, and candles go on to your circle pentacles. Place a golden sacrificial bowl in the center, and anywhere else the other 4 sacrificial bowls that are not golden. You'll need a Foliot binding book, which means you need to make an inactive one, which comes from purified ink, which is gotten by throwing black dye in the spirit fire, and that is combined with a book and quill and 4 white dye. Craft the unbound book with your book of spirits, and then that will make it into a bound book. Place the bound book into the golden bowl, and it will start the ritual to summon your Foliot. The process is rather slow, so go do something else. By combining source gems and seeds in the enchanting apparatus, you can get Magebloom seeds. Use those to get Magebloom fibers by giving the Crusher Spirit your Mageblooms. Set up a ranged item collector to automatically pick up the drops, and once again, go do something else. In this case, I'm going to be prepping to make the parchment. Once you make the parchment, you can throw it in the compacting press basin, and with some blue dye and some iron shard, you can get an engineer's blueprints for crafting components. This is useful for crafting a number of things from immersive engineering. Using the blueprint, I can make electronic components. They require redstone dust, nether quartz treated with slabs, and gold wire. The only thing I don't have is gold wire, which can be made in the rolling mill. Craft one of those electronic components with 2 steel plates to get 8 logistical transporters. In the place of the electronic components, a bucket will make mechanical pipes instead. By claiming a quest reward, you can get a configurator ahead of time. Let this be a lesson. Don't break pedestals that have stored fluids, or they make a giant mess. Now that I've retrofitted everything with mechanical pipes and logistical transporters, I'll quickly describe how this biodiesel setup works. The ethanol is extracted from each of the basins using fluid transporters, as they support filtering of fluids. Those go into those copper fluid tanks, and then mechanical pipes take the ethanol and put it in the main fluid tank. This then gets pumped out and put into the main basin that makes the biodiesel. Then I just need to hook up all the mechanical power to make this whole thing operate, and it should work. A note on why I use logistical transporters is because they don't have an item buffer, so they can just put both items into all 4 basins without having to worry about distribution ratios. Now to make some mechanical crafters. Those just require some electron tubes, some brass casings, and a crafting table. None of that is very difficult. I just had to get started on sturdy sheets next. Because my loop setup is modular, it makes it quite simple to just make the sturdy sheets. All I need to do is reverse the direction of flow on the spout to pump out the creosote, then pump in lava and have 2 mechanical presses, and that makes sturdy sheets. To run the mechanical crafters, you need to give it kinetical energy in the form of a cogwheel. I'm just going to run it on a single speed cogwheel with the hand crank because I want to do this quickly. Place all the items in the correct slots and make sure all the arrows point to one output. You want to make sure it's one output so that all the items actually craft in the correct shape. Then, the output arrow has to be facing an inventory. It doesn't have to, but it makes it so that it doesn't pop up on the ground and risk you losing it. Now I can plug the diesel generator in and turn it on. You want to make sure that they're connected to the source. It outputs from all sides, including the sides it shouldn't look like it outputs from, but I would recommend doing it so that it, doesn't look terrible. The system is already surplusing on biodiesel rather quickly. This one generator is enough to run both the press and the mixer, as long as you run the press at a fairly high speed. I'm going to be using one to run the rest of the system, while any extra are used for other machines. Do note that one diesel generator is approximately enough stress units to barely run this setup. But it alone already makes 10 times what those water wheels each were doing on their own, so it's a very worthwhile upgrade. You can turn the diesel generator off with a redstone signal. Now I'll go ahead and craft a second one. With that, we've done a lot of automation today. Next time I'll try to finish up chapter 1, but this time we got farming going, and we got biodiesel, and we got stress unit production automated, and even some pedestal stuff. So yeah, I think we got a lot done today. With that though, it's about time to wrap it up, so that being said, this has been Pick. I'm glad to have seen you, and I hope to see you again.